So we are here for the first episode of a new format. It's a format a little longer than usual. The idea is to take the time to discuss about things that we do at the UTC, like research project, associative project, and to discover who are the different actors who carry out this project. So today I welcome Mr. Christophe Proust. Hello.
Hello.
Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. You have a quite incredible number of caps. You're a teacher, a researcher at the UTC, teacher in risk management, and you perhaps also give course, so the EV something perhaps?
I take part in the EV courses because the risk aspect is always present. It could be the industrial risk, that's what I teach, or the professional risk, obviously you are all concerned by that, but there is also the environmental risk, and that finds its place in all of the EV units.
The students who know you will rather have this image of safety and risk management that you teach them.
Yes.
But at the UTC, that's what we talk about a little bit. You also do more research on the environment?
Yes.
You're also co-founder of the INERIS?
Yes, I was one of the founders of INERIS, yes.
And it is one of the big French research institutes in the area of security, risk and protection.
Yes, well, it's perhaps worth talking about it a little bit. So the INERIS, it's right next door. It's 25 to 30 kilometers from here, near Verneuil-en-Alate, just behind the airbase. This institute was created a long time ago by the CERCHAR, the French Research Center for Coal Mining, which you undoubtedly know was the scene of very, very serious accident. And therefore, the philosophy of serious risk management, like industrial risk, emerged from there. So when the coal mines disappeared in the 80s and 90s, this CERCHAR was transferred to the ministry. I mean, it was the Environment State Secretariat at the time, to then become a private institute. The employees are under private law, but it is an EPIC, kind of anonymous company that the state owns, like the CEA. It has the same status. And the objective of the INERIS is indeed to bring in industrial risk control in the industry. It is an intermediary between the state, if you like, and the industries, and it's still going on strong today with approximately 500 people in it.
Okay, that's still a good number of people to work on risk.
Yes, I allow myself to present it because the institute is relatively unknown due to its small size, but it deserves to be talked about.
Completely, but I think we will come back on it a little bit later. On what I wanted first, perhaps in a chronological order, how did you arrive at the study of the risk?
Also, I am an INSA Aero engineer,
Okay.
so that's the last millennium. But I did two INSA, the INSA of Rennes and the INSA of Lyon. At the time it was not common, but at the INTA Lyon there was a branch of chemical engineering, which at the UTC became industrial process engineering. But there it became industrial engineering and even energy engineering at the time. And we work on everything, all the new programs about nuclear power plants, all the bionics, all the propulsion, the boilers, all these things. So process engineering applied to energy and the environment. There was a branch in environment that I also did, but then research interested me at the time. We had an engineering diploma, we were not automatically well versed in a test program, and there was no equivalence to a master's diploma. The engineering diploma was quite different, and it was only later that both of those were linked. So I did a master's degree of pure mechanics. There was only that on site, research. It was called the DEA at the time, but it remains a master's degree in research, and well, ultimately I ended up with a double degree in both process and mechanical engineering. That's what allowed me to enter the aeronautic schools from Poitiers, the ENSMA as it is now today, where I discovered, well, security, of course. At the time it was opening up a little bit to security, and I took part in a CNRS grant at the time to work on a problem that no one understood, and me neither. It took me some time. It was the dust explosion in the silos.
Yes, okay.
We are far from propulsion, but the fact that it's something unknown, ultimately, it's disturbing, but it forces you to create new things. And so I started to get into research through that.
Okay, so through explosions and silos?
Exactly.
Saying that we don't really know why, but sometimes it explodes is not reassuring for the silo owners.
Ah, yes, I would have plenty of anecdotes to tell. Let's say that it was such a broad subject that it allowed me to develop the technical skill that I still use today. By that I mean laboratories, numerical methods. When a universe is blank, we are free to create anything we want. And so for a researcher, for someone who is not afraid to take the plunge, it guides a career. Well, at least it decided my career.
Yeah, it's also for that we wanted to receive you. It's because as a teacher of risk management, it's an environment, it's rather niche. Ultimately, it's not necessarily widespread. Even at the UTC, only within the process engineering, which is also a rather niche branch compared to the other branches, we don't really know that. We often have the image of reactors, of manipulating a reactor piston, yet risk management is not necessarily very highlighted, whereas in almost every company, in each sphere of the process engineering, we find it somewhere.
It's a good point and a good question. Answering it is not necessarily very easy or even politically correct, but risk is an engineering science, fundamentally, in the sense in which we understand it at the beginning of engineering, which is the 17th century. That is to say, an assembly of knowledge to produce something new. When you do risk, we approach absolutely all fields of engineering, and therefore you have to put them together to make a decision. It's a security decision, then there is sizing, etc. But it's so broad that ultimately it no longer has its place in today's science, where we are so specialized that we have some difficulties making connections. This is the first aspect. And all the universities are faced with this. You have to deal with teachers who are marked in a disciplinary. That is to say, they are very good in their field. No problem, you can trust them. But they're not necessarily trained to make links with many areas like security, which also requires practical experience. Having experienced things, having designed things, having seen things burn and explode, that requires experience that your teachers who come out of the university do not in fact have. And that is why they came for me, for an experience which was not a university experience. We cannot blame the teachers for not really teaching it or only partially, because they do not have the means to experience. Their experience does not lead them to that. That does not mean that it does not interest them, but in fact, at the university, there is no room, or not much room still today, for security research. It is true in France, we have perhaps 2 or 3 laboratories doing a little security research, but it's also true in the world, maybe less in Germany, but still, it's the same. I know 3 universities which work a bit on the subject. The reason is certainly the basis of knowledge that it requires, but then you have to add an experience that has nothing to do with intellectual capacities. It is simply field experience, and then this capacity perhaps wills a bit in assembling fields of knowledge. Today, the engineering schools are not exempt from that.
Okay.
So that's a niche in the sense that there are few teachers who teach it, but in the industry, it is the opposite.
Yes.
Security is absolutely everywhere, and it is an extremely strong demand from those who hire you that you know what it is and that you know how to practice it. It would certainly be possible to create a high-level master on this subject. Even in France, the manufacturers are demanding. So it's complicated to do this because we need teachers. I don't think that there isn't a way to do that. The UTC is quite a pioneer in this area, and it's a real desire, especially in GP, even more than elsewhere, because safety, obviously, it's all around GP. To seek out teachers who can teach it for students, that's why I'm here.
So it makes a link with a lot of questions that I had. My first question is a good security engineer ultimately someone who has studied security in rather detail, or on the contrary, someone who has studied one of many areas of engineering to have knowledge on a broad spectrum, which then allows them to identify the risk?
Both, in fact. We teach things like that. Besides, I think that we must start by upgrading all the fields of knowledge necessary to be able to identify the risk, know where it is, and then have an idea of how to manage it. For example, if we take into account the organization of the company where you work, you are not going to do the same safety test, for example, in the demonstration hall of the GP, and at Saverglass in Feuquières, where I intervened recently, because it's not the same stopra. It's not the same people, not the same degree of knowledge. not the same degree of mastery, it's not the same complexity. So we will teach a young person at the beginning to take all these dimensions to be able to help him make a decision. The day comes where he will have to calculate a security system or put in place a work procedure, for example. There, he may not have the skills, so it will be an additional level of safety training. There are at least 3 levels of safety training. The general knowledge level, there is the very technological level that we can also do here. And then there is a much more managerial level, so putting in place security plan, business continuity plans, and so on. We train you, we inform you on the subject, but for the moment, we have not yet connected this managerial aspect. So there is a basic level where we put on approximately the same level of the necessary knowledge. Then we add even more in order to be able to approach the identification of the risk towards knowing what is dangerous and what could be done. But implementing the solution is often more technological. So we have to go further in the engineering training first, and then we will do that. But it is still something that is feasible. Dimensioning a vent, a quick closing valve, it's high technology, but we can do it. It's TS2, for example. Then there is a very important area, which is the management, administration, security management, decision-making. So we approach this subject, we started in the form of a small seminar, but for the moment we have not gone any further on that. Including safety management, training could be done, but for the moment we are not there.
But the experience must still do a lot, I think, in this environment. There are patterns which must reproduce.
So that is what I often explain. It is difficult to have complete experience in terms of risk unless we neglect the technological aspect. That is to say, we will stay on the general level, trying to do identification, management, etc. But the fields are so diverse that when we go from environmental risk to professional risk or product risk, we cannot have this experience, or it is difficult to have in-depth experience in all of those areas. Personally, I have quite strong practical experience in management, in industrial risk and in professional risk. But I know relatively little about product risk, environmental risk, and I'm starting to see how to implement it, but we are new to the subject. I don't have complete experience, but I have practiced on the entire vertical scale of the risk. I am capable of teaching it, but like all your teachers, they have experience in a field they practice, a field of research, but not the whole area.
Maybe one last point that I had in mind about the risk. After that, we could perhaps move on to your research more. Often we meet you in the UTC corridors, yet you still seem very serene, very little stress. Is there a link between your job, which consists of dealing with industrial risk, and are you someone naturally stressed in life, or on the contrary, as long as there is no risk of explosion, everything is fine?
Good question. I do not put my work at the center of my life. My work is a means of doing social work. Teaching for me, it's always been natural. It allows me to gradually transmit before my retirement what I discovered, what I learned, which apparently is valid. So it is a way of doing things, and I am entirely aware of the industrial demand that have engineers very well trained on risk, because someone who is very well trained on risk, he generally knows engineering very well. It is still a fairly strong industrial demand, so this is the fundamental reason. But the fact of not being stressed, it is quite natural for me. It's not linked to the risk, I just have a lot of composure. I'd say it's rather linked to a life which has not always been so rosy.
Okay. In addition to teaching, you also have a researcher hat.
Yes.
Within the UTC?
Yes.
You told me that it was centered on the environment, the research that you were doing.
Yes, well, it is a choice of my own. So, I am a professor here, but I'm also a research director at the INERIS. And so I decided, for ethical reasons, but also for the INERIS, not to put my institute, the INERIS, and the UTC in competition with each other in terms of research. It was not imposed on me. The director told me, you do what you want, what seemed the most effective to you. And in fact, the most effective is that the UTC engineers who are interested in this technological aspect of the risk, they come do an internship at the INERIS to see what the INERIS is. It is important for the INERIS, which is a small institute, to make itself known to young people. To have young people who remain at the INERIS or go to industry, which are major customers of the INERIS, the nuclear industry in particular, the energy industry. So I do it this way, so the research aspects are rather treated in terms of risk at the INERIS, it's not exclusive. And the digital aspect, I treat them rather at the UTC, and probably one day there will be research facilities on risk, which will be transferred from the INERIS to the UTC in the new hall in question. Until now, we had not done it for reasons. One of the reasons why I am a professor here is also to create a flow between the UTC and the INERIS and vice versa.
Okay, on the research that you do at the UTC, what is it about and what is concretely so that we can understand well? On what subject it will finally be able to bring developments or changes?
So we are getting into a new subject, which is scientific policy. What I explained earlier is that there are few laboratories which do research in security at the university. So one of the reasons, it's what I explained to you, is the fact that it is difficult to have field of experience for academics, and that doesn't speak to them, not spontaneously in their training. Another reason is that it is still a kind of research which is difficult to promote through publication because it primarily interests the industry. That does not mean that the industrialist will not finance it. On the contrary, it's very easy to finance. But on the other hand, what you are going to produce, well, maybe they don't want you to talk about it, because it touches the heart of their processes. They won't see a point of publishing you, or in any case, make major publication. So that does not open the publication, nor does it allow risk management in the scientific literature. There is some journals specialized in the field, but not much. The journals in question only have interest for industrialists. That poses problems of scientific openness. So I decided, despite everything, to provide research to the university, to place research subjects which are dual subjects. Now, you may wonder, what is a dual subject? It is a research subject which can be exploited both in terms of security results and in another field. There are two areas in which dual security research can be made and exploited, which are energy and environment.
Okay.
So the energy environment aspect, you will find it in the research activities that I'm developing at the UTC under the technological aspect, because we're in the University of Technology of Compiègne. That doesn't mean that I don't do fundamental research. The dual subject are fundamental research, but the visible application, the one that you see, are technological activities. I fundamentally claim this technological engineering side. That can earn me some criticism. I assume it. It is voluntarily on my part.
Okay, I see.
Environmental research, which obviously goes on about energy problem, is a dual subject that I want to talk about. The one I'm doing is the reaction of solids in the form of powdered gravel, etc. with, well, nitrogen, air, and you see me coming. It is the gasification of the biomass. I am personally thinking more of the e-fuel, that is to say, reconstitution of molecule from basics molecule like hydrogen, methane, etc., which is one of the fundamental research in the UTC. But it's going through a little bit of decline, and that's why we try to relaunch it, a little in this aspect. Me and my colleague will certainly continue, but I relaunched this area, and what we are on today, we are rather on the e-fuel, we choose biomass, gasification technology, and we choose a downstream processing system to make hydrogen, methane, or any other molecule. It is indeed GP, it seems to me, and the gas particle reaction aspect is very complex. It is fundamental research on which we need to create digital tools and to carry out fundamental experiments. So the fundamental research aspect is there, and you have to understand that I come back to my dust explosive for the security aspect. It is scientific policy, it is how I do. On the environmental aspect, energy, production of carbon storage, we are on the climate aspect. Well, I have been developing projects on the subject for years because it's linked to energy and it is a security problem. CO2 storage, it's really not easy in terms of risk. And so that's why I've been working on it for almost 15 years now. And we ended up associating to, in dual research, this aspect with energy. Because it is necessary to capture the CO2 in the famous reactor which I spoke to you about. And as we have certain experience on the subject in terms of security, it seemed to me that it could be a new dual subject. So, the absorption of CO2 anywhere, including in the atmosphere.
Okay, I see.
The important thing is to have technological fields open enough to see new products appear, new absorbents and new ways of storing, and therefore as many technological subjects as possible, which makes it possible to direct research on absorption itself. So that is a branch which has been open for a year here at UTC. And then the last environmental subject is environmental risk. So here, I make a little digression. What had struck me recently is the accident of the Lubrizol factory at Rouen. There have been several accidents in a few years in a factory that works well in terms of safety. It's something that shocked me. Well, that doesn't shock me, it surprises me, and it doesn't surprise me. We won't go back to the reason, but the last accident was emblematic, with this big black cloud there of 30 kilometers, which made everyone scream. There was coal almost everywhere.
Yeah, I actually live next door.
And yet, it was an industrial accident. Because yes, it concerned the environment, the neighbors especially, but not in a serious manner. It was a very small warehouse, which burned and caused a lot of soot. It is not a serious accident in the environmental sense of the term, but on the other hand, it really shocked the population, particularly because we weren't able to say how long consequences of this accident would last, which in the end only lasted a few hours in fact.
Yes, it's true.
So here we have a gap in all areas in terms of environmental risk. So I said to myself that we could perhaps develop this aspect around environmental risk by developing new methods. There will be a need of going to measure what is happening on the site, but there is a method of analysis to be put in place. And then what becomes of these pollutants in the water? So hydrology and then water treatment behind. So I find myself with this area which is also developing.
These are recent issues which are developed on the environmental risk.
So the environmental risk is not that much developed in fact. It remains very literary. I have an industrial site which is connected to protected areas, Natura 2000 zone for example. So I am making an inventory before what I do, what I plan to do, how am I treating this, how I intend to treat the runoff, and then how I will put it back together afterward. It is impact studies. It is very literary. But that does not tell us how I treat an accident like Lubrizol. And what I do with the others, fire treatment, because I was not able to completely recover them given the accident. It's the same for the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral. And so there are fields of knowledge to develop, and the UTC had the funds to tackle the subject. So I don't know how far we will go in this area of water in particular, since it is water and soil. But there are the foundations to move forward on the subject. The fundamental reasons why I do this research, it is the transmission, in particular on the way of creating laboratories, but it's also for you, the young people.
Yeah, that's true.
Because, in fact, it's a subject that strongly concerns you. The environmental crisis, in the broad sense, we are right in the middle of it. It seemed to me that rather than being afraid of it, it is better to give yourself responsibilities so that you can do something. Act. Act is a very important remedy against anxiety. It allows you to direct your energy towards positive things. It seemed to me that the UTC had to play its role in this area, and it is above all the future of the GP.
So, we reached the end of the episode. If we talk about us, young people, do you have advice, maybe to the UTC engineering students, or even to the high school students who might possibly be looking at us?
For high school students, you should have to go and look for them in their high school. But some advice, I would say not to be afraid. Don't stay behind your screens. Don't stay in your offices, because you will never discover anything that way. You will remain locked in your beliefs, locked in your fear for some. It's quite dramatic, and I think it's an absolute necessity to confront yourself with as many professional and social experiences as possible. Do not limit yourself to doing office work. You have to go out in the field and discover the reality of it. This is where you learn that what you know and what was taught to you is going to come out again. Be curious. There is nothing better than experimenting on the field, and that is something that we have forgotten a little bit.
And do you have to take risk?
Yes, obviously.
Obviously.
I still showed you that. I took them all the time.
Yes, it's true, yes.
Taking risk, yes, but you have to know how to calculate them. Don't be inconsiderate.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And thank you also to those who have watched this episode. Do not hesitate to follow us on our various networks where other episodes will be published soon.